topic today is vaping and then COVID-19 and the issue of new diseases. So what I thought I would do is not do like they do in television, which is all the hysteria and telling you to wash your hands and don't cough at me, and do some real science. I know that most people are not biologists in here, but I'll give you sort of the gist of it from a very scientific standpoint, how you approach these things from a scientific standpoint. So most people are technical, so you get the sense of it, even though you may not know all the things that I'm referencing. So first of all, we're going to take a deep dive first into vaping with low emotional content, and then the COVID-19 with high emotional content. So let's take a march from Lewis Carroll. He said, "Begin at the beginning," the king said gravely, "and go on till you come to the end, then stop." And that's what I'm going to do. So now there's two approaches to new diseases. One is the panic, which is what we're seeing now on television. And then there's the more scientific approach with you start with what you know and you build on that. So what I'd like to do is start on something, it'll sound very basic. Now I have my cursor shows, good. Okay, I want to talk about neurotransmitters. Okay, why I'm doing this, I'm talking about vaping. Well, because you start at the beginning. And a neurotransmitter is a molecule released by a nerve ending. I'm just making people, nerve ending. You can see that this is a nerve ending, an axon here, and it releases acetylcholine onto another nerve and makes it, releases a neurotransmitter onto the other nerve and makes it depolarize. And the neurotransmitter we're interested in today is acetylcholine and dopamine. But we're not interested in these other neurotransmitters, so don't even think about them, just acetylcholine and dopamine. And for you scientists, chemists here, acetylcholine, here's your acetyl group, and here's your choline. And that's what the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is. So how does it work? Well, you got a nerve here, a presynaptic, synapse is the junction between two nerves. Presynaptic neuron here, it releases acetylcholine onto the postsynaptic neuron. And here's an acetylcholine receptor here, and it will affect the receptor. And acetylcholine receptors are divided into two groups. Here's where it begins to the nicotine. You have nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. Nicotine is made by any number of plants, and muscarine is made by a fungus. Acetylcholine receptors that bind nicotine are located in the nerves in the, here we go, the central nervous system. That's the one we're interested in, the spinal cord and muscles. What we're not interested in today is the muscarinic receptors, which have to do with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is sweating, heart rate, and smooth muscle. We're not interested in that today. Now, the nicotine receptor was worked out down at the Pfizer lab. At the time, they were in a relatively nondescript building about, if you come out of Mount Auburn, if you go about 3/4 of a mile down Memorial Drive, that's what the building was. They've moved to Central Square. But I went down to that building and to a program there where they showed us how they developed the whole concept, the whole structure of the nicotine receptor. And a nicotine receptor is a complex of 5 complicated, what are the glycoproteins, call them proteins. And they're named alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. So there's 2 alphas, and there's a beta, gamma, and a delta. Now the alpha ones have this acetylcholine binding site right here. And here's the receptor in the membrane, and here's the binding site right here. Now this receptor is closed. So sodium can't go in to the cell, to the nerve cell, and potassium can't come out. So the membrane can't depolarize. When you put acetylcholine onto that receptor, it changes the conformation of the molecules, and the channel opens. Sodium goes in, potassium comes out, and the cell membrane depolarizes, and the nerve sends an impulse down its shaft. And that's how nicotine works on the nerve. And they worked that out. Now let's look at the brain. The brain basically is a distributed processor. You have a server in the center here, and you'll have various processing areas around here. A single area is called a nucleus. Sometimes there are a bunch of nuclei in an area, and that's called a locus, which is just an area. Same word, locus is the Latin. And it's distributed processing, and the lung has very discrete areas for doing specific functions. But what the brain is really trying to do all day is to get pleasure, get reward. That's what it's trying to do. It spends the whole day trying to do this. Now, pleasure is in the reward center. And let me just go through this. Here is the forebrain where we do our thinking. So we think something good's going on. It sends a message to the server here, the ventral tegmental area. It's an area, a bunch of nuclei. Sends a message to the ventral tegmental area, which is a server. The server sends a message to the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens releases dopamine, and you feel good. And there's two parts of the way our brain works. One is anticipatory. It says, like this woman up here, she's about to take a really good bite of this wonderful chocolate bar. Ooh, looks so good, does look good. She's about to take a bite of it. So she gets the anticipatory pleasure of taking a bite of this, of the chocolate bar. And even the anticipation will send a message to the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. Oh, this is good. And then when she takes a bite of it, she'll sense it, and the brain will say, this is a good sensation. I like this. Ventral tegmental area, nucleus accumbens, you feel good. And that's how the brain works in terms of the reward. Now, I want to point out one other area that is connected to the ventral tegmental area. There's a lot of them, but this is called the locus ceruleus. And that gives alertness and motivation. So when you get something that's pleasurable, not only is it pleasurable, but it gets your mind alert to it, so you stay alert. So you're feeling pleasure and you're alert. Let's see what, okay. But it gets a little more complicated, which we don't have to worry about. But here's our ventral tegmental area here, and it sends messages to the nucleus accumbens here, and it sends messages to the amygdala where you remember things, so you remember you had a good time. And it sends messages back to here to the prefrontal cortex to say you are feeling good. So it's a complicated messaging system. Now, what I'm going to show you now, remember, this is a stage performance, and you're watching stage singers, and they're going to take your brain or the brain of the audience, and what they're going to do is they're going to work on anticipatory pleasure. And you watch the audience, watch the people on the stage. And remember, the stage people have done this act 1,000 times. They're not feeling the emotions that they're displaying. It's a performance. But they will involve the audience because we're humans in social interaction. And they will get the anticipatory pleasure. And they will get the pleasure of the song. And you'll see the audience get involved and go through the same things. And if you watch your own self, you'll see them manipulating your frontal areas that you understand what's going on, the anticipatory pleasure, the pleasure from the nucleus accumbens, and the alertness that you pay attention. They'll do things on stage to make you pay attention, locus ceruleus. And now I'm going to just play this, I'll make it big, and then I'm going to play it and just let it run through and just enjoy it.
Let's call the world's godfather soul himself, Mr. James Brown. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up, get up. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up, get up. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up, get up. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up, get up. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up, get up. James Brown, come on, get up. James Brown, get up. Big strong D. One more time. Take it up, key. Wow. I feel good. I feel good. Do the now put your Get funky. All right. I wanna ride. In my arms. I know I can't do no wrong. In my heart. Love can't do me no harm. I feel good. I do it hour. Get funky. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Ow! In my arms. I know I can't do no wrong. When I hold you in my arms, I know I cannot do you no harm. 'Cause I feel good. I feel good. You think I'm good. Yeah. Don't you feel good, good, good? I feel good. I knew that you would. Yeah. I'm so good, so good, so good. So I got you. So good, so good, so good. So I got you. I'm so good, so good. So I got you. Without a sight, give me here for dynamite. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well.
So did that work on your brains, everybody?
What should we have expected?
What's that?
What should we have expected from viewing that, hearing that?
To make you feel good.
You know, I guess it depends upon whether people like that type of music or not.
Well, that's true. That's true. But that's what they're trying to do. So what that's what they do on a stage performance. And what nicotine does is a very similar thing. Nicotine binds to the ventral tegmental area. And the ventral tegmental area sends a message to the nucleus accumbens, which sends messages all around, resulting in the release of dopamine, give the sensation of pleasure. Okay, so is nicotine the perfect drug? Well, gives pleasure and reward, alertness, and has a minimal effect of modest doses on blood pressure, pulse, and lipids. And the way people like it is basically, they like a fast rise. The brain likes a fast rise in nicotine levels. This is a cigarette showing the very fast rise over 10 minutes. The gum is slower here, and the patch is even slower. And people don't really enjoy the patch. Gum somewhat, and cigarettes are more appealing. And drugs of abuse act in a very similar manner. Here's the marijuana acts on the ventral tegmental area, nucleus accumbens, and back to the prefrontal cortex. And it's more complicated because there are a lot of cannabinoid receptors. Here's in the forebrain, so your thinking is changed, and your movements are changed here, the motor area, the sensations are changed. It doesn't have not receptors in the visual areas, doesn't change your vision, but it changes your coordination in the cerebellum. So how do we get the nicotine into people? Well, basically, a suspension. Talk about an aerosol. An aerosol is a suspension of fine solid particles or liquid droplets in an air or another gas. And there are various kinds of methods to aerosolize a liquid. For example, this is an atomizer, and basically what is a capillary tube and a bulb. You get a jet, it blows across the capillary tube, and you get these small particles of fog. And you can coordinate it with breathing, but there aren't enough particles less than 5 microns, so it's not useful for nicotine. We can have a nebulizer, which is just an atomizer with a baffle, and here's the jet, and it smashes up the liquid here, and the big particles hit the baffle and flow down. The small particles go into the mouthpiece. But it's bulky, continuous flow, significant power. It doesn't work out. Ultrasonic nebulizer, same deal. It's a piezoelectric crystal. It vibrates, and it makes small particle size, but it's too bulky for the boys' bathroom in the high school. Impeller humidifier, same thing, bulky, continuous flow, energy source, doesn't work out. Meter dose inhaler, which I, as a pulmonologist, have used all the time. You have a propellant drug, you have a metering valve, which stays open and gives a uniform dose as the pressure in this canister falls. The valve stays open longer, so it gives the same dose each time. But it's a medical device. It's made by it has to be approved by the FDA. Single-use canister, that'll never fly. So now we get into stuff that really works. Flame heat. You get small particle size, flow and inhalation, small device size, cigarette, reusable. Unfortunately, little problem, makes smoke with carcinogens. So boiling heat, now again, there's small droplets, not actually a vapor, which is a gas, it's called a vapor, and it's especially effective for volatile liquids. And Lita and Dick have taught us how to read these patent reports. This is patent 1,775,000 back in 1927. It's just a patent that just sat there. Then in 65, Herbert Gilbert produced a prototype, but never commercialized it. And these are the parts of an e-cigarette. First is they're all the same in principle. Some people have a light that's just decorative, make it look like a cigarette. The power source, you have a switch so that you use it so it heats up only on inhalation. Microprocessor to distribute the power, and the heating element here, and then a cartridge which holds the juice, either nicotine or marijuana. And just for you metallurgists out there, the wire is very interesting, very scientific. You use what's called Kanthal iron chromium aluminum alloy, which has a very constant resistance and constant temperature over large ranges. It's easy to manage because you want the temperature around 300 to 600 degrees to get your battery, your chipset, and your resistance wire. Now, nicotine base, that's what you get out of the plant. Nicotine base is shown here, over here. So if you smoke the base, it's called free basing. Nicotine is acidic and it's harsh on the airway, has a high boiling point, slowly absorbed, not a good product. But if you take nicotine and sodium benzoate, you make a salt of it. With the sodium benzoate, it changes its chemical properties, makes it better. Nicotine salt is a neutral pH. It's not harsh on the airway. Permits smoking at higher concentrations. Low boiling point, very important. And rapidly absorbed, rapidly passes the blood-brain barrier. So now you get nicotine aerosol. What could possibly go wrong? Well, unfortunately, you have a lot of inhaled products. You got the nicotine, polyethylene glycol, which is probably harmless. Then you get all sorts of stuff that's mysterious. Diacetyl, which for butter, cinnamaldehyde for cinnamon, benzaldehyde, cherry. There are a lot of metals and essential oils. Now, essential oils are not essential in the sense that they're needed, but rather essence is the French word for smell or fragrance. So they give it a fragrance. All these things are being inhaled, as well as all of these metals: aluminum, nickel, lead, zinc, manganese, iron, cadmium, copper, tin, and chromium. And you exceed the current health levels by more than 50, close to 50% or more of the products: chromium, manganese, nickel, and lead. So that's a funny thing going on. So now, back last September, all these diseases were showing up in people who vaped, and people wanted to show what they were vaping, whether it was marijuana, was it nicotine, both. So Charlie Baker did the right thing. He said, facing an explosion of vaping-related illness, Governor Charlie Baker took aggressive action. Of course, the Globe, likes him, so they gave him some nice words, but he did the right thing. You have to do that. You need to take a pause. Then they sort of made fun of Trump. He says, Trump says ban of flavored e-cigarette product could lead to illegal sales, and they kind of poo-pooed it. But having amnesia, 2 weeks later, in the Globe, there's a headline, mass banned vape sales more than 2 months ago, and now business in New Hampshire and Maine is booming. And show the cars going up to New Hampshire. So the people will go seek it out. So what are these e-cigarette nicotine effect? What's it do in the lungs? Well, in the short term, it causes increased lung inflammation. Long term is to be determined. There was a recent study in the New England Journal about it causing COPD. What they did was they just asked the question in yellow: has a doctor or the health professional ever told you that you had any one of the following lung or respiratory conditions? Well, gee, it's just what the doctor said. No testing. I couldn't believe they published something like that, but they did. So what's this vaping pneumonia thing? Well, the first group that presented, it's out of Minnesota or somewhere, they had 24 patients collectively with diffuse pneumonia. 3 had never used marijuana, only nicotine cigarettes. However, of the 3 marijuana-free patients, all of them had marijuana breakdown products in their urine. So now you have a problem because people are lying. They don't want their parents to know. They don't want their employer to know. So it's a tough deal to get the right information. So is vaping pneumonia a new disease? Well, the principle is that new diseases are like new jokes. A new joke is just an old joke that you haven't heard. So the approach is to look for familiar patterns, and everybody here knows a plaid from a polka dot from a stripe. Now, making sense of the findings, I went back to my Milton Academy education. Julius Caesar in 58 BC went up to Gaul, which was from the Pyrenees to the Rhine River. And he was fighting it out with the locals and sending missives back to the Senate in Rome, telling him what a great guy he was. But the first sentence of the Gallic Wars shows you how to do expository writing and explore the unknown. He sent back to them, Gallia est omnes divisa in partes tres, which means all of Gaul is divided into 3 parts. Then you just know what the rest of the sentence is going to say, what the rest of the paragraph is going to say. He just divides it up into parts that you can understand. So let's look at the patterns that we see in e-cigarette and vaping acute lung injury, e-cigarettes, which is e-cigarette and vaping acute lung injury. The 4 major patterns are here. Now, these are probably words that you've never seen, but for a pulmonologist, this stuff is old hat. There's nothing new about this, and we'll just run through them very briefly. First, I want to give you a little background. The macrophage, macro means large, it's a big cell, and phage means that it eats. The macrophage cleans up debris. And when it cleans up debris that's a lipid, it's an oil, it'll take it inside it, and if you then stain the macrophage with a lipid-soluble dye, oil red O, which is a very vivid dye, doesn't take much to make things red. It combines with the lipid and makes these red granules. So it's filled with, macrophages are filled with lipid here. Now here's a pattern of lipoid pneumonia. This is your reference slide here. This is air sacs here, air sacs all over the place. Here's a blood vessel. Maybe there's a bronchus over here. And this is the lipoid pneumonia. Here are the macrophages, these red things filled with oil red O, and these are neutrophils here. Now, lipoid pneumonia has been known for a very long time, as Archie Bunker would say, since time immemorial, that the lipoid pneumonia was seen recognized in kerosene workers when we started refining oil. That was before the Civil War, that they would be inhaling fog of kerosene, and the kerosene, an inorganic lipid, would deposit in their lungs, and some people would get these pneumonias and go on to die. And this is a picture of cat skin pneumonia. Now, the black is the air. The more dense is like the heart. Well, this is normal lung, and here's the lipoid pneumonia beginning. Here's the lipoid pneumonia spreading down here. And here's the lipoid pneumonia breaking up here. So that's an old pattern being stimulated by something in the inhaled products. Then we have eosinophilic pneumonia. Eosin is the dye in lipstick. And certain cells of the allergic system, when you stain them with eosin, they pick up this red dye, and they're quite pretty, the eosinophils. As part of the allergic reaction. Here's your reference lung. Here's an eosinophilic pneumonia, lungs with eosinophils. Something is setting off this eosinophilic allergic reaction, something in the products that are being inhaled. Then there's hypersensitivity pneumonia, which is seen commonly in farmers who inhale fungus antigens and they develop antibodies, and people who breed pigeons inhale the pigeon antibodies and they develop hypersensitivity with, this is your reference lung, and these are called neutrophils, filling the lung, reacting with inflammation, reacting against that inhaled antigen. So in the case of the vaping-associated lung injury, there's something in the inhaled vaping product that some people develop the antibodies to. And then fibrinous pneumonia. Fibrin is the end product of blood clotting. And some people will develop patterns of fibrin in the lung. There's all fibrin in the lung. And these are old familiar patterns being set off by something in the products. So why are there different lung reactions to vape products? Well, nobody knows. The products aren't standardized. Certainly the patient aren't standardized. Consumers don't know the source of their legal vape products. And you mean they can't barcode marijuana like everything in the supermarket and match it to a credit card? No, they cannot. The credit card companies will not do business with the marijuana brokers because it's illegal on the federal level, and the credit card companies use federally chartered banks, and they will not deal with them. So it's a cash business. And real good thinking if you want to have for public health. Then consumers buy illegal products and they lie. And some illegal product looks exactly like legal products. And then there's the question of some people inhaling cocaine. So it's a big mishmash right now. Now, so what's the government doing? Well, I love this headline because I know the truth. This is called MD Edge News, but it said CDC, FDA in hot pursuit of vaping lungs injury source. Really? Okay. Now this is from the CDC, and these statements make sense. Vitamin E acetate is strongly linked to the EVALI outbreak. Vitamin E is in the marijuana products, and the reason you use vitamin E is it has a low boiling point, and where it touches the heating element, where the oil touches the heating element, especially if it gets too hot, oils will burn a little bit and they discolor. Other oils discolor and turn yellow, whereas vitamin E doesn't. And when it comes to inhaling a yellow vapor, it's kind of like when you go cross-country skiing, you get really thirsty and you look at all that snow. Well, you don't eat yellow snow. That's kind of the reason you don't like to inhale yellow smoke. So vitamin E acetate was thought to be a good product. And that's when these EVALI-linked pneumonia started to show up. Now, they come from 16 different states, so it's not a single supplier of tainted products. And then they put in the qualifier. This does not mean that there are not other substances in e-cigarettes or vaping products capable of causing lung injury. A persistent small proportion of EVALI cases do not report the use of THC-containing vaping products. So you're really having both nicotine-related vaping lung injury and marijuana vaping lung injury. But at this point, mostly it's in the marijuana. Lipoid pneumonia appears to be due to an oil, a lipid, 2% death rate. Perhaps it's vitamin E oil. Vitamin E oil is found in almost all the specimens of lipoid pneumonia, but that does not prove cause and effect. And in another context, vitamin E, which is antioxidant, was given in the ovine model, the pig down here, as an inhalant to see if it protected against lung irritants with its antioxidant qualities. And so they had the pigs inhale mists of vitamin E in the cages, and the vitamin E deposited in their lungs, but there was no lipoid pneumonia seen. So that's kind of a fly in the ointment. It has to be clarified what's going on. And then there are other patterns, eosinophilic hypersensitivity and fibrinous pneumonia, are not related to vitamin E. So there's more to be known and worked out about. So why do people take the risk? Why do they do this? For that, we have to go to our consultant, Scott Adams, the Dilbert comment. Free will is an illusion. People always choose the perceived path of greatest pleasure. So you have e-liquid, which is a free-base nicotine. You have e-liquid, which is a nicotine salt, which is much better absorbed, and it's much like the combustible cigarette. So this is the one that people are going to choose. And looking for that pleasure. So the solution is research into vaping products. And what we need is animal models and controlled prospective trials. However, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. Schedule I drugs are unable to attain federal fundings for research programs. So your tax dollars are not really at work for this yet. There's some pressure to get the Congress to change this regulation. So that's where we are on nicotine. Now, any questions there before we go on to our next topic? Anybody out there?
Yes. No
Oh, yeah, we're
questions
here.
for me.
Anybody else out there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We're here.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so my immediate reaction when I first heard about vaping is, why does anybody want to take small particles of stuff into their lungs? Seems to me that's asking for trouble, no matter what you're doing with it. And I was surprised that there's never, I don't ever see it described in this context of taking micron-sized particles into your lungs.
So, Charlie, you were never a smoker, and nor was I really to speak of, and I think that's the difference.
Well, I tried to be a smoker back when I was 19, but I hated the taste in the morning, and so I quit.
Yeah. No, that's right. All of us probably tried smoking at one point in time in our lives.
Yeah.
That's the difference. I think that's to Jerry's point, in that if you don't smoke, there's not much attraction to vaping. If you do smoke, it's perceived as healthier.
People think that smoking is going to cause them cancer.
Jerry, you're on mute.
No, he's not. At least I heard him.
May I chime in, Bob, here? Smoking, people perceive as causing cancer. Young people have, up until now, perceived vaping as having much less risk of that. And that's what vaping products were sold on the basis of, that they would not cause the lung damage. Now it turns out they will.
Yeah, I thought that for young people, a crucial issue was you smell bad.
True also.
Can I say something here?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's lucky that we have other delivery systems for marijuana. I like the gummies.
Okay. Well, that's what it is. That's what kind of works. I've never had it. So I don't know. We're held to a higher standard, so I don't know. Okay.
So we'll move from lung cancer to throat cancer, so we're good.
Okay. Now, how do I do this now? Let's see. I have to go back. Let's make it smaller. Let's see. Can you see can you see this COVID-19 now?
Not yet.
No, we're on a full screen just with lots of different things here.
I just see you, Jerry.
Oh, you know why? Let me just escape out of this. I have to go back to this. Oh, let's see what I'm doing. Let me get rid of this.
This is new to all of us, and I appreciate everybody's patience as we get over the humps of technology.
By the
Now,
way,
what are you seeing? What are you seeing now?
no change.
What, Peter?
While Jerry's doing that, if you bring your mouse, if you're on a PC or something similar, you look at the top right, there, you'll see something called a speaker view and full screen, and there's a way to switch between just seeing the speaker and having video with all the participants. I'm currently looking at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 25 window display of everybody, and I can see everybody whose video I think is within there.
Oh, here we go. Okay, now.
That's called speaker view on my screen.
Right, and the other one gives you the
gallery.
Right.
I got it. Here it comes, Jerry.
There
Can you see it now? Okay.
Well, it's not.
see part of it.
Now, do you see the whole thing?
Great.
Yeah, I've got it.
It's
Okay.
all there. There we go.
Okay, good. So here we go. So talk about the coronavirus. Is COVID-19, is it a new disease? Well, the coronaviruses were discovered in the 1960s And in the 70s, when I went to medical school, they were only interesting because they produced good electron microscopy images, but they didn't, at that time, cause any significant human disease. They caused a cold. It was nothing. Nobody had any interest. It just passed right by it. Now, so this Coronaviridae, there are two subfamilies, 5 genera, 23 subgenera, about more than 40 species. And I've seen different numbers between 6 and 8, maybe 9, cause disease in humans, but they were mild colds, and it was not a subject of great interest until recently. Now, the coronavirus, let me see, I'm looking for, okay, let me go back here. So let's look at the structure of a coronavirus. What is a virus? Let's look at the structure of a coronavirus. Coronavirus has what's called sense messenger RNA. For you biologists, messenger RNA is in the cytoplasm. It's made in the nucleus, goes to the cytoplasm, binds to a ribosome, and makes a protein or whatever you want it to make. And a sense messenger RNA does that. It can create the opposite helix, a nonsense messenger RNA, and then multiply itself the way DNA does. That's how a virus does that. We don't multiply our own messenger RNAs, but viruses do that. And but it needs the cellular ribosome to manufacture product. Now, coronavirus is different from human immunodeficiency virus, which is an RNA virus, but uses a reverse transcriptase to make DNA and then finds its way into the genome. Messenger RNA just gets into the cytoplasm, does its thing, and then degrades, but it makes new virus. And this is the picture of the coronavirus. Inside, this is the RNA helix. There are actually multiple copies of this. And it has an envelope here in red, and then it has a couple of main proteins tucked into the envelope. You have this M protein, which is this little tiny green thing, and then the very important spike proteins. See these purple, pinkish, lavender, these spike proteins. These are what land on the cells and stick out. Now, the coronavirus, as we said, causes a common cold. And then it was seen back in 2003, back in Asia, there was a severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. And these people were very sick very quickly, easily identified, and that virus did not pass human to human very easily. So they didn't cause outbreaks around them very much, and they were easily contained, and once they were easily contained, they just seemed to disappear. And then in 2012, in the Middle East, a similar coronavirus popped up, Middle East respiratory syndrome. SARS had a mortality of about 10%, MERS had a mortality of 35, 40%, but very sick, easily identified, easily isolated, didn't transmit well person to person. And then back in the fall, of course, we developed another coronavirus transferred from a bat to maybe a civet, if anyone knows what a civet is, I don't, and then to a human. And now the virus's name, which you can't really read, is SARS COVID, I don't know, CoV-2 or COVID-2. Who knows how to read that? So everybody just calls it the COVID virus, coronavirus disease, which is COVID-19 is actually disease. If you remember polio virus is the name of the virus, and poliomyelitis is the name of the disease, but everybody calls the two of them polio. And that's what we call, so we call it the virus COVID for lack of inability to read this word. And how is COVID transmitted? By an aerosol generator. Oh, I forgot this one. We are very good aerosol generators. He has a little virus, creates a little aerosol, and somebody else will breathe it in. So now what we have is what's called a pandemic. So you have the COVID-19 virus, and the definition, it infects people and causes illness, spreads easily person to person, and spreads worldwide, and that's why we're in the panic of the pandemic. We have pandemonium. And prevention. Now, you hear a lot of people quoting people without ever really knowing the data. A simple face mask is here. And that's about 70% protective against aerosols. It's not 0%. It's somewhat protective. And people say funny things like, oh, it doesn't keep you from getting the virus, only keeps you from transmitting the virus, which makes no sense at all. Particles go both ways through this mask. People just saying that without they're quoting each other. And this is your N95 mask, which gets out 95% of the particles, the aerosolized particles, and that reduces the infectivity not to zero. So other methods, which they talk about now, the social distancing, so the isolation, if he has the disease and they don't, or they have the disease and he doesn't, but that's the principle. And then transmission precautions. Try not to cough up an aerosol. Wash your hands because it tends to be on the virus and on surfaces. And this is what's going on in hospitals where you're preventing direct transmission. This woman is wearing a mask. These guys are all in these hazmat suits trying to prevent transmission. Look kind of spooky to me. Now, here's where the action is. It's in the vaccine. What we want people to do, especially ourselves, is create antibodies directed against the coronavirus. And there are different kinds of vaccines, and these are all being explored in great detail right now. First is the one we're all familiar with, the killed vaccine. That's what the Salk vaccine was. You just take the virus, you culture it up, inactivate it with chemicals, heat, or radiation, and there you go. Or you can take an attenuated virus. And the way you do that is you take a virus and you pass it in egg culture over and over and over. And there's a lot of genetic drift to viruses. They don't replicate their DNA or RNA very accurately. So you get a lot of genetic drift and it loses its virulence properties. And then you give the virus to a person, they don't feel sick, the virus multiplies a bit, and they make antibodies to it. Or you can make a subunit vaccine where you take some spoke or something that's on here, usually have a bacteria manufacture these, and then inject the subunit and it acts as an antigen. Or you can have a false carrier where you take part of a virulent virus as per its genome, take part of its genome and put it in a mild virus, and you tell that virus to create the spikes, and so it'll look like the bad virus, so you make antibodies to it. And then, which we'll go over, what Moderna Cambridge is doing, they're making a nanoparticle delivery, which is basically their own little virus to deliver messenger RNA. And in the distant future, we'll have DNA in a little plasmid, a little circle of DNA, which we'll inject into our own cells and get into our genome, and we'll make appropriate antibodies. So let me get a false carrier. Let me get my vest getting colder. So get a false carrier. What this is you take the virus, in this case the coronavirus, and it has these spikes. So you take the part of the genome that makes the spikes, you put it in a benign virus, and as part of the viral capsid, it'll make this spike. So then you can take the virus, and since it's live, oftentimes you can just give them, like polio, you can just give an oral vaccine, and it gets into the body, doesn't cause symptomatic disease, multiplies a bit, and you make your antibodies. Now, I'll give you a little background for antivirals. I just want to make a point here. This is an HIV virus, and this is the portal of entry into a lymphocyte. You have to have a CD4 receptor and some co-receptors. If you can block these receptors, you can prevent the entry of the virus into cells. So what you hear is now whether you can use an antiviral. And people are looking at this really carefully because this has already been developed. The SARS COVID virus is the same as the regular SARS port. It's some angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor. That's where it goes into the cell. That's already been recognized. And if you can block this port, you block viral entry. Also, an old technique is just to find an important enzyme of a virus that it needs to make its coat and inhibit the viral enzyme. Or you can give a false nucleotide. Now, let me show you what a false nucleotide is. This is, here is ribonucleic acid, his DNA. Now, this is just the ribose. Ribose is a 5-carbon sugar. So you have 1 is here. Here's the first carbon at the juncture, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here's RNA with the ribose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and an oxygen base. Now, if you take this RNA and you join this oxygen to this carbon over here, this oxygen goes to this carbon, that deforms the ribose. And when you do that, it's the virus will incorporate it into its RNA, but it's misshapen. And it's like having a broken clasp on your zipper, that the zipper will go to that clasp and it won't pass anymore because it's deformed. And that then stops the replication of the virus. Now, the one you've seen in the news is remdesivir, made by Glaxo. And now, these false nucleotides have been around forever. I know that ribavirin was around in the year 2000. I know that. And people are very familiar with acyclovir, which has been around for a good while. There's a whole bunch of these false nucleotides. But this particular one, this takes adenosine. Now here's adenosine and here's ribose. So this would be adenine, or adenosine. Adenine, with the ribose on there. And what they do is they take this adenosine here and attach it to a ribose, but then they add this nitrogen in here. And that deforms the stoichiometry of it, so it gets incorporated into the messenger RNA. And the SARS virus and the MERS virus don't replicate. And so this is being looked at to see if you can prevent replication of the COVID virus. But you'll have to give it early on because the disease is one of the COVID-19 is a disease of disordered inflammation, where the inflammation, it's not the virus that kills you, it's the inflammatory response. So you probably have to give this early on in the course of disease. Oh, testing, we heard about that. So now, the SARS vaccine has already been developed. Took a formaldehyde inactivated SARS virus, so it didn't work. Now, given to monkeys, they make antibodies to it, and it protects the monkeys. Now, there's no SARS around to see if it works in humans. It does raise our antibody levels, but you can't test it because there's no SARS. And viral spoke antibodies have been done the same. Those spokes that we showed you. Same deal as above. The viral spoke antibodies given to a monkey creates antigen given to a monkey creates antibodies, and it's protective. Again, there's no SARS around to check it out. Now, the company in Cambridge, they've already done this. They made nanoparticles of MERS spike protein. No, they didn't do this part. There's another company, a MERS spike protein, and it induces antibodies in animals and provides protection from disease, but it's not released for humans, but there's no MERS around for its release. So now this is what Moderna is doing. Has everybody heard of Moderna? I've been in Cambridge, in the newspaper. Has everybody heard of that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Jesus, no papers.
No.
What they're doing is basically making a virus. This is kind of a complicated slide, so I'll just take you through some of the parts of it. If you take regular messenger RNA, in this case, it's messenger RNA to make the spike protein. So then you'll make it, which will be an antigen, and you'll make antibodies to it. You take this messenger RNA. Now, if you put it in a tissue culture and you shock the culture, little electrical current through it, the messenger RNA will find its way into the cell. That's called electrical incorporation or electrocorporation. You can't shock people, so it's a nice idea, but it doesn't work. So you need to stabilize the messenger RNA, and they do this with protamine, which is has a very strong positive charge and sticks to the negatively charged nucleic acid, just to make it stable. And then you can put it on an emulsion. And then to stabilize the emulsion, you put a membrane around it. This is what they do here. And they put these long, complicated molecules called dendromeres. And the dendromeres are just stabilizers. They don't have no activity under their own, but they keep more like putting protein like jello, so it maintains its form. Here's the messenger RNA. And they actually do it with the protamine, so it looks like this. And then they put a little cations in here. I think it's to make it bind to the cell membrane. And if you look down here, this is their final viral, almost their final viral product, where you have the messenger RNA here to tell you to make a spike, to tell the ribosomes to make a spike protein. And you have a cholesterol and then some other lipid in this membrane, which will fuse into the normal human cell membrane, release the messenger RNA, make the spike protein, which is then released into the bloodstream, and it acts as an antibody. It's an antigen, and you make antibodies to it. And now these have been made, and they're really quite benign, and the messenger RNA degrades after a while. So you have your antibody, and you have antibodies, and their messenger RNA is labeled 1273. Obviously, they've been through a lot of them. So in terms of where we are now, we know a lot, and we will get there. So the issue now is just to make it through the current pandemic, and then pretty soon. Now, if you notice what they did, this company, Moderna, they're doing their first test in Seattle. The way the FDA works in normal situations is they give the product to a small number of people to see if it kills them. And this won't. They give it to a small number of people and see if it kills them. And then they give it to a larger number of people to try to figure out what are all the minor adverse effects, what goes on, how it interacts with other drugs, just how it works. And then to a larger group, like 30, first about 300, 350 or so. And then a larger group, 3,500, to see if it has a health effect. But you'll notice that they did their situation out in, their first test is being done out in Seattle. Well, why is that? They're very suspicious because they're giving it to a place where there's a high incidence of COVID-19. So they're going to be looking at this first group. And if you have a disease, usually, you have to give the medicine to 10,000 people to see if, if 50 of them get the disease and you can affect the disease. Now, if half the population's got to get the disease, you don't have to give it to a lot of people to see if it works. So I think what their strategy is, they haven't called me on this, I think their strategy is to do their testing where there's a lot of COVID-19. So if the first 45 get out there, get the shots, and don't get COVID-19, and then the next 350 get the shots, it'll never work this way perfectly. But if they didn't get COVID-19, then you know the stuff works, and you don't have to give it to 3,500 people and follow them for a year if it's reasonably benign, which is likely to be. Not foolproof, but it's likely to be. So that's what they're doing now, and it'll be very interesting to see what the first group of 45 does in terms of both antibodies and adverse effects, which I don't think we'll see, and then the prevention of the first and the second groups and prevention of the disease. So that's where we are, and let's hope we all make it through the pandemic, and then we will have a vaccine and we will have prevention of this disease. And I think that there may be, 50, 60 coronavirus strains now, maybe more, but they're going to be out searching for, there's going to be a lot of companies in Cambridge out there searching for strains of COVID virus, so they'll be ready for the next one when it comes. Okay, so that's my talk.
That's a great talk. Absolutely great talk.
Jerry, thanks so much.
Yeah. Jerry, do I hear you with a dry cough?
I have had this since my last cold.
Oh, all right. Just checking.
I do not have a cold. I am on couch arrest.
Are you open to questions?
Hi, Al. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Jerry, good. I got your postcard. Al, I have your postcard right on my desk. Here's your postcard.
Oh, thank you.
Just waiting for the epidemic to pass.
I'd like to go back to your slide on antivirals, in which you point out that the entry point for the virus are the angiotensin converting enzyme receptors.
Yes.
And as you well know, and possibly others know, we use angiotensin receptor blocking agents to treat hypertension and heart failure. They're widely used. Is there any, would you comment on whether there's any value in using those drugs to produce prophylaxis?
I think there are actually a lot of enzyme receptors, Ang2 enzyme receptors types, and the drugs only block the enzyme receptors on the kidney. I don't think they're universal. I don't think it's going to work. It's a family of receptors. It's not really a receptor.
Okay.
And the drug that you use all the time is really specific for the kidney.
Thank you.
Okay. was a good question, though. I wondered that myself.
Anybody else have questions, issues? We have plenty of time.
Is everybody on self-isolation?
I'm 6 feet away from my computer.
I'll try not to cough toward the microphone.
There we go.
I'm closer to my computer, but I think it's not going to spew droplets with virus on it.
Well, it's really the what they're saying is, no meetings more than 50 or 500 or 10 people. None of that makes any sense. Because because 50 people can't be within 6 feet of each other. So it's really the cohort around you that counts. Now, when we were at influenza, now talk about transmission. Back in, what was it, 2009, Al, when the H1N1 missed, the vaccine missed? I think it was 2009. Remember when the vaccine just didn't have the H1N1? That 2009 is around then. And I was teaching a lot at the Mount Auburn ICU. And everybody had dutifully got their flu shot, and we were all unprotected because that's the way it was, because the vaccine missed. I think it was 2009. Now, the Mount Auburn ICU had 6 patients virtually for 3 months with influenza, and they were shedding virus. Now, usually when people take infection precautions in a hospital, they break technique all the time. They sort of wear the mask and they wear it on their chin, and they take, they put on the gloves, or they just run in the room for a minute with no protection, and, because I'm just going in to do this. But when you told people that they want to get the flu, this wasn't to protect the patient, it's to protect you. All of a sudden, everybody did precautions right. And in 3 months of face masks and gowns and whatever, not one person in the Mount Auburn ICU got influenza. Not one. We went 3 months because nobody was breaking technique. And that was really, showed me the efficacy of face mask, gowns and gloves, face mask with shield, gowns and gloves. It really works.
Jerry, could you go back and address the issue of masks? You made a comment about the virus moving in both directions.
It does, of course. It doesn't know what direction it's going. It doesn't have a compass. It doesn't have a compass.
But we're advised not to bother wearing a mask if we are asymptomatic. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, what they're trying to do, they're lying. What they're trying to do is do something that's sensible. There's a shortage of masks. And what they're trying to do is get the masks into the areas of most danger. They're rationing.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than telling people we're rationing and you can't have it, which would be very politically unpopular, to say the truth, they're saying, oh, they really don't work. They're really not necessary. But they do work, because those are the ones we used at Mount Auburn. We didn't use N95 masks. We used regular masks. And when you did a bronchoscopy for an AIDS patient, you double masked. So you took 70% of 70%, and nobody ever gets AIDS from when you do that. So they really do work, and they work in both directions. So you have a political issue, not a medical issue.
Good point, Jerry. When you go to the supermarket, do you wear a mask?
I have an N95 mask.
I'm sorry. Say it
I
again.
have an N95 mask. I am unable to reveal the source.
Okay.
And you wear it when you go to the market?
My daughter is a laboratory veterinarian, and she works at Mass General, not in the hospital, but actually at an institute across Blossom Street. But they have an N95 because of the monkeys. They have these transplant monkeys, and they can get herpes virus. So they have N95 masks there for a different reason.
Jerry, John has a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
Exactly, Steve.
Okay, one of them is, he says, once we go back to seeing people and so forth, why won't it come back?
It will. And it will become, now what we have is a pandemic. And then less than a pandemic is an epidemic, and less than that is endemic. It will circulate through the society. And just like other respiratory viruses do, they just circulate back and forth, ping-ponging around to people who are vulnerable. The purpose of this sheltering in place and all this stuff is because the way the healthcare system works is this. You have an ICU, let's say a medical ICU, say Mount Auburn, which I know well. This is a 12-bed medical ICU. Granted, they won't be doing elective surgery, so they'll have a 12-bed surgical ICU as well available. But a 12-bed medical ICU usually has between 10 and 12 patients all the time. Some are ready to go. There's no push. And, if you have 11 beds filled and you have an empty bed, nobody's in a rush. So you get them out. But there are probably 10 or 9 that really have to stay. So Mount Auburn really only has 3 beds available. So it doesn't take a lot of people to overwhelm the ICU system. So what they're trying to do is reduce the numbers of the demand. You see, when they start in with the hysteria, they say, oh my goodness, we're going to have 200,000 people in ICU beds when we only have 100,000 beds. Well, they're not all getting in the beds at the same moment. So it's dispersed out over, let's just say, 3 months. So it may be that the capacity, if you can stop all surgery, elective surgery, so you don't have post-ops in the ICU from elective surgery that didn't go so well, and you do other things to reduce the ICU population, get people out a little faster, maybe upgrade some step-down units so you can take the stable patients out a little sooner, especially the cardiac patients, where they're getting good at taking them out sooner, right, Al? Getting the cardiac patients out of the ICU sooner, and free up some beds, so maybe you'll have 8 or 7 beds filled, not 9 or 10 or 11, 12. And so you'll free up the beds, and then you'll have, by spreading out the demand, that's really what you're going to do. And there is the hope that they'll find an antiviral to fool the COVID virus so that you can give it early on in disease and prevent the massive inflammatory response. And maybe the vaccine will get fast-tracked if it works out, because it's not going to be hard to find a lot of people who would potentially get the disease if it prevents it.
Jerry, you might want to turn on your chat window. There are some questions coming in there.
How do I do that?
Push the chat button.
If there's no chat button, then there's more options to pull a drop down that shows chat.
Hey, Jerry, while you're doing that, just one question. You said double masking, 70% of 70%.
Well, you reduce it by 70%, and you reduce that by 70%.
Well, my understanding is a little different, and maybe you can help me with the better understanding. The 70.
Wait, how do I do? What does the chat thing look like?
Well, come on. What you're doing is you're taking 30% get through. So you're going to take 70% of that 30%. So now.
Well, 30%, but 30% will get.
It's about 9% will get through if you do.
And nothing has an infectivity of 1. And so it does work. It does work. Doing a bronchoscopy in AIDS, I can tell you, doing a bronchoscopy in AIDS, it does work. Where is the? Oh, here's the chat. Okay.
You were going in the wrong direction of my question.
What?
My understanding is the 70% and 95% are related to the micron size of the particles that the mask allows.
Yeah.
So if it relates to the micron size, it's saying 70% of the microns of a certain size get through.
Correct.
Double masking reduce that as opposed to using a finer micron size mask.
Because you don't have one available.
So
it's right. That's what the N95 is. It's a finer size.
Okay, so if I triple mask, I get to the point that I get to approximate a 95% mask?
Yeah.
I think you get to the point where you can't breathe. Yeah,
well, that's the problem. It'll go in around the mask. So it's not very practical, but I can just tell you it does work. So, and it works, and if you can reduce your risk, it doesn't get to 0, but it gets reduced. And nothing has an infectivity of 1. Well, let me run through these questions here. There have been news reports about some HIV-related solution in Australia. Any truth to this? Well, what they're looking for is whether you can inhibit the use of false nucleotide, which some of the HIV viruses have. Use a false nucleotide that have been developed for HIV, and see if that works. And let's see. The next question is: once we go back to seeing people, we won't come back. It'll become endemic, and hopefully by then we'll have a vaccine or a false nucleotide or something. You see people touching their faces. People touch their faces about 20 times an hour. That is the way it is. Trying to get people not to do that. I've seen the people with two peaks used to justify isolation and shelter. Yeah, two-peak curve is. That is correct. When you have something that travels very quickly, if you all gather together, you can spread it around. It's somewhat analogous, although you remember Legionella is not a virus. But when you were at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, when you were spewing virus all through the lobby, anybody who walked through the lobby got it. So you had a peak. Once the meeting was over, the peak disappeared. So if you just can reduce, by putting people in isolation, you will reduce the peak, but you may not reduce the area under the curve. Now, what country is doing E95 masks? Is a limit what is the country doing to increase the production of N95 masks? There's a dearth of information on that because you have to have machine equipment. And I don't know what that machine equipment is because they're not made in the United States. Yeah. So I assume that they're going to be made in the countries of origin and shipped.
Probably made in China.
Made in China. Well, they're doing okay because you can't ramp up production that fast.
That's right.
Can you get the virus more than once? Very, very unlikely. That when you make antibodies to any virus, if you had mumps or measles or whatever, you can measure your antibodies now and you can't get it again. You just can't get it again. The reason you get the influenza, have to get influenza shot is it's a kill virus and it doesn't produce a very prolonged antibody response in a killed virus. You don't get much of a stimulus. When you get a virus, you get a big stimulus and you make antibodies and you really can't get a virus a second time. So what is the proper way of a used mask that has a concentration of COVID-19 on it? Well, I was saying the wastebasket. The virus only lasts a few days. So once you throw it in a barrel and it sits in the barrel for a couple of days, it's gone. And it's not even clear. They say it lasts on a surface. Now, what it lasts on a surface, now that means you can find the RNA. It doesn't mean it's infective. That's a tricky business as to how long it can. How long you find the RNA is not tricky. It'll be about 3 days. How long it's infectious is another question. It's not very clear, and nobody's going to find that out. Is the limit to how many times long mask can be used? There's no limit per se. Once it gets too moist, they say particles will start to get through, but if you dry it back out, you can use it again. So if you're only using it for a short period of time, you can just let it dry out and then start all over again.
Barry, the information that the virus persists in an aerosol form for 3 hours. Do you want to comment on that? That sounds pretty disturbing. You go through the cashier at Market Basket. Nobody in your immediate vicinity at that moment is coughing, but an hour earlier, somebody could easily have been.
Well, let me give you an example of an aerosol. When you have a bug and you spray it, how long does that aerosol stay? You see it fall to the earth. The larger particles rain out fairly quickly. The very small particles is a good point. The 5-micron particles can float for a while. They'll float and they will disperse. So that's a problem. They will disperse, so the concentration falls. But if you run into one, for you, the concentration didn't fall. So that is a problem, and that you don't want people congregating. And you want good ventilation systems. Now, when you're outside, it disperses so fast that it's diluted a zillion times, and you just can't find it again. In a closed space, it will persist.
Take what you said and go further, Jerry. With 6 feet separation in a group, just somebody has the virus, they sneeze, they cough, they do whatever, and the group moves and you walk into that so-called airspace or near it. 6 feet isn't anywhere near as useful as it used to be.
I said it didn't make any sense what they say.
Okay, fair enough.
It doesn't make any sense. Now, you will reduce it. Yes, you will. You will reduce it as compared to somebody coughing a jet right into your face. But it doesn't make any sense what they're saying. 6 feet, 8 feet, 4.5 feet. It's much less likely, but it's not a perfect system. That's the way that it is. The perfect system, if somebody were in a house with isolation, is you stay in that room and you use that bathroom, and I will come up periodically with the door closed. I'll come up after it's been closed a half hour or so and, and put the food with a mask and put the food down and probably won't get infected because the probabilities are there. But there is nothing that is foolproof other than true isolation. Now, having said why younger people, yes. Well, it's not insight, it's a pattern. I can't give you the insight, I can only give you the pattern. That when you have a virus, you have an inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response in old people seems to be just like in sepsis, where the inflammatory response becomes self-generating. You've seen this, Al, in ARDS, where the initiating agent is gone and the inflammatory response just continues to multiply itself out of control. And why older people do this is unclear versus young people don't. But that's the pattern. Now, there's a 34-year-old doctor in China who died. Well, that's the part. The news people, they have a funny way of saying things. I think they're trying to reassure themselves. They said, well, 80% of the people get better. Now, when teaching the house staff about risk, you try to teach interns or residents, you try to teach them, because medicine, as you know, Al, medicine is a lot of risk management. How do you deal with risk? So I say to them, you're taking your family on vacation and you're going to go on an airplane. And one airplane has a 75% chance of crashing and the other airplane has a 25% chance of crashing. Which airplane would you get on? And they say the 25%. I say, wrong. You wouldn't get on either one of them. Okay?
True that.
That's how you manage risk. Okay? So,
Jerry, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is Gary Patrick.
Yes.
What temperature is necessary to kill this COVID-19 virus? What I'm thinking, for example, is snail mail that comes into the house. Of course, things that are in envelopes, you can open the envelopes. Be careful what you do with the envelopes and what was inside.
Who licked it?
Pardon?
Who licked it? Who licked the envelope?
Saliva.
But I'm concerned about, say, magazines. I'm thinking, can you put some of your snail mail in the oven in the kitchen at a low temperature? And what temperature is necessary? My guess is about 140.
Exactly. Nothing will survive 140 degrees. Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you wipe things down either with Windex, was ammonia and alcohol, or alcohol, that will denature the virus, and you just let it air dry, and it will denature the virus.
The thing that is effective is quaternary ammonium, and that was in Lysol until everybody bought that out.
Well, quaternary ammonia is just NH4, like NH4Cl.
Yeah, that's the active ingredient.
Ammonia is NH3. Ammonium is NH4.
And that's the active ingredient.
That will kill everything. Of course, you can't get it, but it will kill everything. Now,
Can you talk a little bit or say something about the independent instances of COVID where they can't find any transmissibility? They seem to just pop up out of nowhere. Like, I think was there one in Washington or California where it first started?
Well,
like
the concept of spontaneous generation went out with Lowenhoek about 1800, 1700, that there's no spontaneous generation. You know, the spontaneous generation theory was that you put a piece of bread on the counter and fungus would grow out of it. Penicillium would grow out of it, so it was spontaneous generation. Well, that doesn't happen. The people had an exposure. They had exposure to an asymptomatic person, presumably, and I can assure you, none of these people were sitting at home for 3 weeks all alone and then suddenly got the COVID virus. It didn't happen. There's some exposure somewhere.
So basically, it's just an unfounded, not or unrecognized exposure. There's no such thing.
Correct. And now they're saying, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, that for every identified case of COVID virus, there are 10 people with either such mild symptoms or no symptoms, so that they are carriers and transmitters, but they don't manifest the disease. And so they're around. And very few people have been in total self-isolation. Now, Virginia had its first case, which means that there are a bunch of, West Virginia had its first case yesterday. and which means that there's a bunch of cases there because somebody asymptomatic brought it in.
Is the reported fatality rate still around 2%?
Well, it depends who you ask. This is like what plane do you want to get on? It doesn't really make any difference. But if you see, what we don't know is what percentage of the population is asymptomatic and carrying, because the death rate includes everybody who has it. Everybody. So now you say, well, that's not the number I want to know. How about the death rate from people who are symptomatic? The death rate for very young people who are symptomatic is about it's less than 0.1%. The death rate for middle-aged people starts to get into the 2% range. For people over 65, it gets 6, 7, 8%, and for people over 80, it gets 15%. So depends on the population that you're dealing with. If you're in a nursing home, it has a very high mortality, as that nursing home in Seattle showed. If you're in a grade school, it'll have probably no mortality in any single grade school.
Could you address the fresh fruits and vegetables question? What should we do if we buy fruits and vegetables in the supermarket?
Does the word canned fruit ring a bell? Fresh fruits and vegetables are left out in the open. Fresh fruits are out in the open. You have all sorts of people walking by, all sorts of deposition on the fresh fruits and vegetables. How long it will survive is another question, but that wouldn't be my first choice.
Now,
So
if we bought some
left
vegetables in the market, could we cook them and?
Oh yeah, if you cook them, they're hit 140, they're done with everything.
And for things like apples, you can use soap and water on them.
You can, and that will sterilize them. That will do that. That's a good point. That the ones with membranes on them, good membranes. Perfect point.
Is that 140 Fahrenheit
140.
or centigrade?
Fahrenheit.
Okay.
But nothing survives that. Nothing. In radiation of a microwave oven kill a virus, necessary temperature. The microwave won't kill the virus. It's the temperature that kills them. And 140 is 140. They think Seattle Nursing Home was a sick building or people do something wrong. No, it wasn't either. It was that the people is the vulnerable population, and it was going around, and it wasn't recognized. People had colds for a while because people are usually asymptomatic for 5 days, and then they start to get symptoms. So it's passing. And if you know how nursing homes work, that what you have is a lot of demented people, and during the day they put them all in the common room so that 1 or 2 aides can keep an eye on all of the people, because they're always trying to fall out of their chairs and take a walk and do crazy things. So if you leave them in their room, somebody has to watch them all the time, because you're not allowed to tie them down anymore. In the good old days, you could tie them down and restrain them, and it was okay. Now, some libertarian prevented us from doing that. You can't tie people down anymore and lock their hands up. I don't know why. So now you have to put them in, they put them in a common room, and that's just the ideal pot to spread disease. Couldn't have thought of a better way to do it. So does anyone know the death rate for 80 plus with no comorbidity? It's probably up there. Now, granted, the people who are in nursing homes are not in good health as a group. You have some good health Alzheimer's, and you have some bad health everybody else. But it's probably certainly over 10%. So it seems over 10%, but we won't know until you really do a very large cohort and see the people who stayed home with it, who you didn't hear about, who now have anti-coronavirus antibodies. Then you will know, but it doesn't really help any individual because it has such a high death rate. You won't get on that airplane no matter whether it's 5% or 15% or 80%. You won't get on that airplane. Or at least you don't want to get on that airplane, but that way. Doctors have, I saw it mentioned in that VU video that I think John Rudy sent out, but I've heard it before. It's called third-party effect. Is that doctors, and by our experience, we don't get the diseases that our patients have. A patient has pneumococcal pneumonia. It's not transmitted person to person. I'm not going to get it. Al is not going to get it. It's the other person that gets it. It's the third party that gets it. And same with pulmonary hypertension. I'm not going to get pulmonary hypertension. You're not going to get pulmonary hypertension. It's a third party that gets these diseases. So doctors have, from our own experience, treat people all the time, and we're not going to get the disease. This is very different. But it's a mindset that doctors have that they're not going to get the disease. It's kind of like soldiers going into battle. They're really sad that some of their friends are going to get killed. They're not, but some of their friends are. It's called third-party effect. And people are having trouble dealing with that because they just think it'll be somebody else.
Well, it's reached 11:30, which is our normal stop time. Does anybody have any more questions?
I have a question. So we're being told that we want to go to all the social isolation so that we lower density, so that we slow down the spread, so that we drag out the effect until so that we don't we don't swamp our medical facilities. But doesn't that kind of logic, this is my question, doesn't that kind of logic mean that what we really ought to be doing is slowing it down for everybody who's not in the medical profession, but try to get everybody in the medical profession infected so that they can get better and then take care of us when we get sick?
Well, that's the Boris Johnson theory.
Is that Boris Johnson?
Oh. Yeah. What he said first was, let's let it go through the whole country. Then we will have herd immunity and that we'll be done with it. And you'll die and I won't, third party effect. You'll die, I won't, and then we'll be all set. And that the system will only overwhelm for a month or two. And then we will have herd immunity. If you have cattle and you immunize 99 of your 100 cattle, the 100th one can't get it because there's nobody to give it to them. So you can have herd immunity, and that will be worked out. And it's a sticky wicket for those who get it, but the others will be of some benefit. So what you have is herd immunity. That has not a lot of appeal. Now, but if you slow the curve down, and you're the lucky one who doesn't get it, who's over 65 and doesn't get it, you will have herd immunity out there at the latter part of the curve anyway as the time goes out. And it will be harder and harder for the virus to be transmitted as the herd immunity builds itself up.
And how do you account for rebound?
Because everybody won't be, because because everybody's not immune. It'll have a harder time. I didn't say it'll become endemic. It'll have a harder time passing around. It won't be epidemic. But it'll still be endemic. It will be endemic. Endemic. You remember? Well, you remember polio? Polio was endemic. It wasn't epidemic. Came out in the summertime, but it wasn't epidemic. Everybody get it, but it was endemic, and everybody knew somebody who walked with those braces. That wasn't unusual to see an adult who had polio walked with the braces. President Roosevelt had polio. They always had him pictures of him sitting down. And one time he went to give the State of the Union message. Show you how news was different. He went to give the State of the Union message, and he insisted on walking down and balancing on his braces without his canes, because he wanted to walk down. And he walked down and he fell flat on his face. And news people didn't say a word. It was not discussed. They just picked him up and he continued to walk. Never made the papers, never anything. That's the way the news was when he fell flat on his face.
To Steve's point, I think, Jerry, thank you very much. I think I'm gonna declare victory here. And
can you tell me how many people are on? I'm just interested how it worked. How many people are online?
We've had between 30 and 32.
Yeah, there's 30 right now.
Yeah, it's been up as high as 32.
So it's basically the same as a meeting. Good.
Good. Yeah, it was a great talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So are we all done now?
Yep.
Thank you, Jerry.
Very informative.
Thank you. What are you going to say, Peter?
I want to talk about next week that Dick Wagner's going to finish his presentation on patents. And if we have time left, we'll do a little potpourri. And we can do potpourri in this setting. I think this group chat sort of worked out well enough. People don't seem to be talking over each other too much.
Yeah.
And for potpourri, it's possible also to use chat or incorporate the chat.
Correct. That works out well too. Yeah, it's because it saves the questions. It's a good point, Bob.
Yep, we can do all that stuff. And next week we'll learn as we have this week.
Okay.
Everybody, I think we'll declare victory.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jerry. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The leave meeting button is on the bottom right, most of your screens.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jerry. Bye-bye.
Right.
Jerry, are you still there? And am I still here?
I'm still here for right now. Yeah.
I just typed it, but this is Bob Melanson. Is there any hope of finding an N95 mask anywhere?
No. They're all taken up. They're all taken up. The hospitals have scoffed them all up. There are none to be had.
Okay. That 70%, is that like you'd get at Home Depot?
Yeah. You get they have them at all the hardware stores. I don't know if they're still there. That I can't speak to. But they have them at regular hardware stores because carpenters use them all the time. They're trying to get the tradespeople to turn them in to the hospitals.
Huh.
The trade, construction has stopped, and they wear masks, when they're doing the wallboard and things like that. They don't want to inhale everything. So they're trying to just get them to donate them to the hospitals because they're so cheap that they may just say, good.
Because I have a bunch of them, but they're more sophisticated. They have the two straps and they have a way for the air to get out, a baffle, so that you don't, so that the mask doesn't blow off your face if you exhale rapidly.
Which for carpentry?
Yeah, you get them. They're more expensive. They're about twice as much.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if
those
those
are very cheap. These masks are very cheap.
Right, I know the ones on the left are, but
yeah,
the ones I get, I just can't afford to buy the better ones, so I do. I just wondering how effective that would be.
Well, it's somewhat effective. It's imperfect, but somewhat effective. Now, the N95 masks, when bought in bulk, were very expensive. They were $1 a piece. They were considered very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And $1 a piece.
Okay, yeah, I guess there's no masks at Home Depot either.
No, everybody scoffed them up. Now who's ever making them will start to make. They'll start to get back into the supply chain again. But you have to remember that the supply chain was geared up for hospitals with intermittent use and a few carpentry hobbyists and some professionals. So their absolute capacity to create masks is limited. Now they may have been running one shift a day, and they might run 3 shifts a day because there's money to be made. But it's not as if they were holding back and could make 3 million a day if they chose to. So they'll be in limited supply because they'll be scoffed up by the hospitals. Public health rules supersede everything else. If a hardware store were to get a 100,000 hardware company like Ace Hardware or whatever would get 100,000 masks, the public health people could they can't take them. They'd have to buy them from them at the price but they can't hold them back, saying they're ours and we're going to do whatever we want.
What you can get now is whatever's in somebody's warehouse.
Yeah, they can commandeer that. They have to pay for it, which is fine. Otherwise, it would be illegal. It's called a taking. You can't do that. But you can compensate them and for their loss and then take it away.
Just had another question. Is there any hope for expanding respirator availability?
That's a very tricky point. It's hard to manufacture a ventilator fast. You just can't do it. And the people in business know how many they can make. They don't have factories that could have turned out 10,000, but only turning out 3. And respirators last a long time. Hospitals will buy. Now, I happen to know, this just happened by coincidence. Leahy, the Puritan Bennett ventilator, has become obsolete, and they're not going to support it after a certain time, the 740. And when big hospital systems do not like to go to aftermarket vendors for support. So Leahy Clinic, now there's a month ago, bought 53 new ventilators from Hamilton, as it turned out. They didn't go back to Puritan Bennett. And those ventilators will last at least a decade. So there's not a lot of manufacturing capacity for ventilators. So they're saying now there's 8,000 in the national supply. The military probably has, the military is being very secretive. They probably have a whole bunch of them that they don't want to talk about, but that they have. But it's not infinite supply, and you need wall gas. You need a way to provide them oxygen. It's not just the ventilator. You need a gas source, and you can't. You could jury rig them somewhat, but you can't just infinite, triple and quadruple the supply of ventilators. That's not realistic.
Okay, that's what I figured. Also, I read this morning that training to use them is significant.
I know how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
I've built 2 ventilator units. I know how to use them. It's easy, but it's sort of like playing the piano. I can't tell you how to play the piano. You have to practice it yourself. And pulmonary disease is complicated in this sense. There aren't that many facts, okay? It's not like endocrinology, which has an infinite number of facts, but endocrinology has only one principle, receptors, or 2, receptors and feedback. And once you know what receptors and feedback is, you're an endocrinologist. In pulmonary, we have concepts of gas exchange and fluidics flows, accompanied by cardiovascular physiology. And it's very hard to understand, even though not a lot of facts. You have to integrate them. It's very hard to understand, and then how to integrate ventilator support into that system. The fluidics of the ventilator is hard to understand. And so it takes a lot of teaching and training and practice and thinking it through what you're doing. And because it's hard to understand, there's no recipe. You don't do it by recipe, you do it by principles. And they're complicated and they have to be integrated. And that's what makes it difficult. But once you've done it for a long time, it's not difficult. But you can't just walk up to a machine and run it by rote. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so we're all set? Okay, I'm going to sign off and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.